I'm beginning to understand that we should trust not our eyes, but our spirit. And I don't just mean that in the sense that we should ignore the things around the world. We should ignore the physical circumstances that we find ourselves in. That we should ignore everything around us, but rather that we shouldn't focus on those things. We shouldn't focus on the things that we don't want in the world. And we should rather focus on the renewing of our spirit. We should focus on the spirit that God has given us. We should focus on the spirit world because in the spirit world, God has already given us everything we could ever want. You know, there's a Bible verse that says, I'm paraphrasing here, I forgot what it was, but it says that if God has given us his only begotten son, then what will he not give us? And I think that's very true. I think that anything that we could possibly want, at least in like a pure sense, anything we could possibly want is something that God has already given us. It's that we don't allow ourselves to have it. We don't allow ourselves to have these things because we're so focused on the physical. We're so focused on the things of this world, the flesh, that we don't see that we already have it in the spirit. We don't see that the spirit is what controls the world. And that having something in the spirit then means that you have it in the flesh. And instead, we almost do it backwards. We try to change an effect by changing an effect. We try to change the world, the physical world, by changing the physical world. Oh, maybe I should do this different physically. Maybe I should go after this thing. Maybe I should go after that thing. When the whole time you can only change an effect by changing a cause. You can only change the world by changing the spirit. And you can only change what's outside of you by changing what's inside of you. Because God does not judge us based on what's around us, but rather what's inside us. He doesn't judge us based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in, but rather the circumstances that we have in our own hearts. So it's about recognizing that you should trust not your eyes, but your spirit. You shouldn't necessarily ignore the things around you, but rather spiritually, feeling-wise, mentally, you should substantiate what you want. You shouldn't focus on what you don't want. You should focus on what you do want. And I think in focusing on not necessarily the wanting portion, but the having portion of whatever you desire, then you substantiate that in the physical world as well. I'm forgetting what it's called again, but there's a part of the human brain that literally describes what I'm talking about, in the sense that it basically controls what you focus on. So that if you just think of red cars and you just notice once, oh, there's so many red cars on the road, all of a sudden you're going to start seeing more red cars than you ever have in your life. And it's not necessarily that there are more red cars on the road, but you begin to notice it more. You begin to substantiate that more. And maybe to an extent that literally does create more red cars on the road. So it's about recognizing that you can do that with anything. If you want to be more abundant, if you want to be more successful, if you want to be more joyous, then it's about substantiating that thought, that feeling first, before you see it in the world. Before trying to control what's external, you need to first master what's internal. You should focus not on your eyes. You should focus not on what you see around you, because what you can see can change at any time. But rather you should focus on what's internal. Because through substantiating the spirit, the gratitude of having whatever you desire, then you're allowing that to happen externally. It reminds me of the story of Lazarus, and before Jesus rose him from the dead, the first thing that he did was thank God. He thanked God because he knew that it was already done. So I think that story literally shows us that it's not necessarily about any physical action that you take, but it's all about the spirit. It's about being connected to our spirits enough that we're not focused on the world. That's not what we think about. We focus on the renewing of our minds. We focus on the spirit. Because in focusing on the world, we'll constantly just be impacted by the world. We'll constantly, anytime something goes wrong, then you start to think, oh, maybe this isn't true. But in the spirit, everything is true. In the spirit, everything happens. Everything positive happens, at least. So it's about recognizing that when you're focusing on the world, your circumstances may change at any point in time, which may have such a great impact on your mental and emotional state. But when you focus on the spirit, when you focus on the internal, it's something that's constant. And it's something that changes as much as you want it to change. It's about recognizing the amount of power that we have internally and almost the lack of control that we have externally. And giving that control up to God, because it's not up to us to control what's outside of us, it's up to God. So it's about recognizing that the only thing that you can control is your own spirit. The only thing that you can control is your own heart. Everything else you can influence, but you can't control. It's up to God to control those things. So it's about recognizing that if you substantiate anything, any feeling of having whatever you want, if you substantiate that spirit internally, then you will experience that feeling externally. Just like if you say, this is going to be the greatest week of my life, you'll end up feeling like it's the greatest week of your life, and it will end up being the greatest week of your life. But you can extrapolate that to anything. If you feel like you have like a car or something, and you exist and you truly believe that, and you truly feel that gratitude, then that car will find itself to you, as long as it's a part of God's will. But, going back to what I said earlier, as long as the desires that we have, as long as they're pure, and as long as we're not idolizing them, as long as we're not putting them on a pedestal, then who says that God won't give it to us? God only wants what's best for us. He only loves us. He only wants to show us his love, his mercy, his kindness. So he'll give us what we're meant to have. But it's about substantiating that positivity. It's about substantiating that first. So I have a Bible verse that goes with the topic of this video pretty well. It's taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 12 to 14. And it says, what we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. This is what we speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness, and cannot understand them because they are deemed only throughout the Spirit. So I think this verse is literally telling us exactly what I was describing almost. But, the last point I have is that it's important to understand that when you're walking in the Spirit, the things that you do in the world seem crazy. They seem nonsensical. They seem illogical, because they are. Because it's not applying to the rules of this world. It's applying to the rules of the Spirit. It seems like, like even just saying some of these things, they seem almost illogical from a worldly standpoint, but it's about recognizing that that's almost the point a little bit, because they're not supposed to abide by human logic, by worldly logic, but it abides by God's logic. So it's just about recognizing that even when you think, oh, this is stupid, oh, this doesn't make sense, that's part of the point. Part of it is recognizing that it's not something that you understand with your mind, but something that you understand with the Spirit. It's not something that you understand with math equations. It's something that you understand with the Spirit. Because the Spirit is only described by Spirit-taught words, like the Scripture says. And the world is explained by world-taught words. So then how can world-taught words describe the things of the Spirit? They can't. We can express them through world-taught words, but truly, a lot of this is something that you almost only experience, not something that can be truly described. Because it's of the Spirit, it's not of the world. So, I even took something from this video, something I've been thinking about recently, and I think I recently, even just today, came through, with a major big breakthrough on it, because I'm just understanding so much more about it, and really just substantiating that gratitude in my daily life. And I'm really getting better at not focusing on the world, but focusing on the Spirit. So, I hope this helps you on your journey as well. Thank you for watching.